Week 6 is in the books, which means that we have more data and more trends to discover. And today, Jeff Bell and I, we're going to look at some of the most interesting usage changes around the NFL, specifically with the running backs and wide receivers. And Jeff, I think the one we want to talk about first here are the Rams wide receivers. Puka Nacua out with an ankle injury. Sounds like he is not going to be ready for week 7. The Rams then have a week bye. We're hoping that he can be back in week 8. Now, there's a few different ways that we can look at this one. Tyler Higbee had himself a good game. So does Puka Nacua's absence mean more of Tyler Higbee? Or does it mean Jordan Whittington, who we saw last year in 2 games without Puka Nacua, pulled 18 targets? I think you could make an argument either way. Which way are you leaning, and how do you see this Rams room shaking out without their number one receiver?
Well, I think it's important to note that Tutu Atwell was a scratch as well, and he was a later in the week scratch. And so if he gets back for this game, my expectation, regardless of the situation, my expectation is that Devontae Adams is going to get peppered like a true number one wide receiver. Would be probably, I mean, if you were able to bet on who's going to be the leading target earner this week, I would not be surprised if it is Devontae Adams. I think it's really interesting when you look at the Rams usage. Let me pull up the weeks here for sure, but I know that, so in weeks 3 and 4, Puka Nacua was targeted very, very heavily. And then the rest of the season, Devontae Adams actually had more targets than Puka Nacua outside of those 2 weeks. And so that's even factoring in before this past week, they were tied at targets. And obviously we saw Nacua injured in this game and Adams get targeted heavily. I think with the Rams now, you're going to treat Adams like a true number one receiver. You're going to have Whittington is going to play. I think Tutu Atwell is going to play quite a bit. If he is able to be active for this game, they'll probably rotate through the tight ends. I don't know that would be aggressively thinking that Higbee is going to follow this production up. And I don't know that I would be aggressive on any Rams receiver outside of Adams.
So, I mean, Whittington, we kind of know what he is at this point. And I just talked about him in the roundtable that we do with Matt Waldman. As you've talked about before, Jeff, this was a high school running back. He went to University of Texas as a running back. And that's why you see him. Like, he is best with the ball in his hands and making plays after the catch. He obviously can't do the downfield stuff that we see from Puka Nacua, beating man coverage, running these deep posts, things of that nature. I'm not expecting that from Jordan Whittington. But when it comes to the jet sweeps and the end arounds and the slants and the little crossers and that sort of stuff, I could see that going Jordan Whittington's way. And I don't think the ceiling is all that high, but if you're looking at a guy who, like I said, in 2 weeks last year, he got hurt while Puka Nacua was also injured, but in the 2 full games that we saw him without Puka, he had 19 targets and 14 receptions over that time. So, I mean, that does give him a solid floor, and we know he's got the athleticism to just break one tackle and go off to the races. So, Adams might be a top 3 wide receiver for me this week when it's all said and done and I finish my week 7 rankings. But I think that Whittington is probably going to fall inside the top 40 and make for a decent high ceiling flex play.
I hear you. I think that a lot of that usage, I don't think Cooper Kupp was active for those games either. And so I think they were just looking for any solution. And if I remember correctly, they didn't even have Demarcus Robinson in those games, who had a good rapport with Stafford. But I'm pretty certain that both Nacua and Kupp were out for those games.
They were. Checked and they were. Yep.
Yeah. They like Whittington a lot. I think he does a lot of, you're right on the jet sweeps, those types of things. I think Atwell probably would be maybe the better play. Like if you're looking at a player that if he's active, because we've seen that ability to get downfield to create the big play, that's where I might lean on terms of the wide receiver rankings if both are active. Kanata Mumfield, I think, will play a little bit. Xavier Smith is a player they like quite a bit. I think they'll rotate pieces through. I think Whittington will be out there most every snaps, but I don't know that it will be more than kind of a nominal role, be my expectation, which means that he'll have a massive game, because every single time we've disagreed on anything this year, like, you've been right, and he'll go out and catch 70 balls for 75 yards and a touchdown.
Let's go ahead and talk about the Bucs wide receiver room here, Jeff, because my goodness, I mean, like, we were looking at this in the preseason, talking about how Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Emeka Egbuka could be one of like the best wide receiver trios in the league. At this point, I don't know if I'll ever see them play together this season. I mean, it was just like one injury after another, and now here we go into week 7, and it looks like Cade Otton might be like the number 1 target earner on this team this week. But we also got Sterling Shepard and Tez Johnson and Cameron Johnson, and I mean, like, we were talking earlier today on the waiver wire show with Alfredo Brown, and I was kind of like tongue in cheek. I'm like, pick up Oscar Delp and Payne Durham. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, or Durham Payne, like, Baker Mayfield can just kind of turn anybody into a fantasy relevant player. But taking the tongue out of my cheek now, trying to be a little bit more serious about this. I think Tez Johnson, Kate Otten, Sterling Shepard, those are the guys that we're looking at going into week 7, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very serious show, Dave. So make sure to get that tongue out of your cheek and be ready to go. I think Mike Evans is the name to watch right now because I don't know that
100%.
he has been ruled out or not. And it wouldn't surprise me if it's close that they push him to be able to play. I think that you're
Even
looking
as a
at,
decoy. I could
well,
see him out there at 60, 70%. Just this is a huge game against the Lions. Like they want to win this game. This could potentially dictate who gets home field advantage through the playoffs.
yeah, so schematically, the way that they lined him up last week was Emeka Ibuka was playing in the X role. They had opposite him on the other side was Tez Johnson was playing as the Z wide receiver. Then they had Sterling Shepard working in the slot, and then Kate Otten obviously at tight end. And so I think heavy volume to Kate Otten. Shepard has been the slot all year long. It's kind of one of those, like, I understand the argument of him getting a bigger role with the guys out, but at the same time, he's kind of done the same thing all year long. So it's like, how much is that role there for him? And then really we saw the undrafted rookie Cameron Johnson was kind of the star of the game after Emeka Ibuka got knocked out. I mean, we know Tez Johnson had the big play and then they got to do a somersault and got to get the MVP chance, but it was Cameron Johnson that they were going to that stepped into the X receiver role for Emeka Ibuka. And so it's the type of thing of if Mike Evans is active, then this kind of all makes a little bit more sense where you're plugging Mike Evans back into that X role. You've got Tez Johnson opposite him. You've got Shepard in the slot and Otten. And if Evans is out, then it might be the under the radar Cameron Johnson might be the better play.
And the way that I talked about this, because we've discussed this situation on a lot of shows already this week, and the way I'm looking at it, like if Mike Evans is active, I think I prefer Tez Johnson as kind of the desperation flex play because the defensive gravity is going to pull towards Mike Evans, and Tez Johnson does have that speed where he can get behind defenses. And it almost kind of feels like last year with Jalen McMillan, where like Jalen McMillan just week after week kept ripping off these big touchdowns, and we're like, surely he can't keep this up. And like, I'm willing to just kind of get ahead of it with Tez Johnson right now and say that he can do it again next week because he did it last week, and we've seen Ibuka doing this week after week after week. That's what this Tampa Bay offense does, is set up for those big, deep touchdowns. But if Mike Evans isn't in the game and we see this same Cameron Johnson, Tez Johnson, Sterling Shepard trio, I think then I might lean towards Sterling Shepard as the preferred guy that'll be highest in my rankings, just because it might not be pretty, but we know that he'll probably have command of the targets. But this is one where I think we do want to get a good read on this because I think there's going to be gold to be found here while Ibuka and Sterling Shepard, or Ibuka and Chris Godwin are out, because we saw last year, Kate Otten, Jalen McMillan, these guys were just popping up out of nowhere and we were putting them in our lineups and they were giving us great production.
Yeah, and maybe we jumping around the sheet a little bit, but not too far around the sheet. But the Chargers running back situation, I don't know that we really took it with enough gravity last week probably. And I'm looking at adding one of these guys, and I know we were not flippant about doing it, but at the same time, we kind of was said like, I don't know if I want to be aggressive one direction or the other. I mean, the way that, granted, that might have been the Miami matchup, and you might just want any running back against Miami, but obviously Kamani Vidal was a massive smash this past week and feels like a massive riser. And I think like I'm reflecting, I'm looking back, and I'm saying that if there's an opportunity to grab a starting running back, and especially like as we're through buys and everything else, in most every league, you probably do need to be pretty aggressive about grabbing that opportunity to grab a starting running back, because we have just seen it time and time again in fantasy football where a guy will step up out of nowhere, like a Tim Hightower or something like that. And even if it's just a month, you get running back one production, top 12 running back production for a month from a random guy that you picked up off of waivers. I mean, that is the difference maker between getting a bye, making the playoffs, or your season being done.
And we talked about it a little bit last week, and that was kind of my pushback because I remember you saying like, I want to take kind of a wait and see approach here. And I said, but you understand, like they're playing the Dolphins, so like people are going to want to get one of these guys in their lineups, and it ended up being Vidal. And now we do have some clarity here, but now the Chargers' schedule gets a little bit tougher. So I know now people are like really fired up to get Kamani Vidal back in their lineups, but now I have a little bit more pause going into week 7. I mean, I went back and I watched that tape from that game because truth be told, like we didn't see enough from Kamani Vidal in his rookie season to really make any sort of declarative statements. Like he was injured, he was a healthy scratch. He had that one nice wheel route catch early in the season that got everybody super excited, but like there just wasn't enough to really draw any sort of conclusions. And when I went back and I rewatched this Miami Chargers game, I was like, let's see how Kamani Vidal looked. And I still walked away from watching that game with even more questions because like there were just these holes the size of a barn door that he was just able to run through 30, 40 yards downfield before he was even getting touched. So I get it. Like the opportunities there, it is a good offense, but I still think that like what we saw, let's just hypothetically say like 6 weeks that Omarion Hampton is out, Kamani Vidal's the starter. It wouldn't surprise me if what we saw last week in week 6 is kind of the peak of that 6 week stretch.
But they only get to play the Dolphins once, so I mean
I know.
that's a big part of it. But and I mean to exercise a little bit of caution on that regard, it was wheels up for Michael Carter. It was like Michael Carter bell cow back for Arizona, and then we get the report coming out of that game right before that game that they would be going with Zonovan Knight as Bam Knight as that lead back, and it turned out to be a pretty even split. I mean, it ended up being Knight got the
Michael Carter
touchdown.
got the start too,
Yeah,
which
Michael
was
Carter
funny.
got the
Like,
hypothetical start, but like it was and then Knight
and he
got
had
the
the lead in
touchdown. So
touches,
yeah,
but Knight punched the touchdown in. Yeah, that's one that I think I am okay just kind of avoiding. Like we're looking at a not good team splitting touches between two not very good running backs. Like I think that is one that I'm okay just saying like, I'll let other people deal with that headache because I don't think there is a clear starter in that backfield.
well, and part of it too is when you run into these situations without, it's going to be wheels up on Vidal now. Everybody grabbing Vidal. He is the like lead back over and above, but like look at the Broncos, where you've got the Broncos, you've got J.K. Dobbins. It will be one week J.K. Dobbins is the only back that is playing. The next week Tyler Bidet is plugging in and playing passing downs, and RJ Harvey never gets to touch the ball. The next week, it is a dead even split between RJ Harvey and J.K. Dobbins, and that's with a lot more talented pieces than what we're talking about here with Arizona and the Chargers. And so, I think the idea that there's just going to be one guy and it's definitively that one guy is a little bit antiquated, probably in terms of game planning of what we're seeing out of NFL offenses now.
Yeah, and we'll see. Like if you've got an Omarion Hampton or Bijan Robinson or Christian McCaffrey, there's just going to be one guy, but those guys aren't typically sitting in the reserves waiting for their spot to be called up. And that's why, like, even we kind of fell for the Woody Marks Nick Chubb thing a couple of weeks ago. Would it surprise you all that much if like the Chargers come out next week and now it's a 50-50 split with Hassan Haskins or even like a 60-40 split in Hassan Haskins' favor? Because like Vidal did what he had to do last week, but like maybe that was just the game plan. Hey, we want to use the speed to get behind this soft Miami defense. And what if next week they say, hey, we want to lean on the physicality for Haskins a little bit? Like this could be a very game plan dependent sort of split with this backfield.
Or we want Naeem Hines to be the passing down back, and we're going to split Haskins and
Revenge
Vidal
game.
in early downs, and we're just going to like, and I think that's the bigger point of it. I think it's, and if you grabbed Vidal last week, I mean, kudos to you. Like you played this correctly for what we know right now. It's just that the exercising of caution of what direction can this go from here, because I do think we see those situations. We look at Rashad White, like where it's like, I mean, it's 1 or 2 weeks and they're plugging White in as the lead bell cow back. But then when Bucky Irving comes back, it's like, what's that role? Bucky Irving's right back to it. White's done. Or if this goes a little bit longer, does it get to a situation where we saw a touchdown and it was in minimal usage, but we saw a touchdown out of Sean Tucker? Does it get to a situation where it starts to pull to an even split between Sean Tucker and Rashad White? It's just that these offenses and these coordinators are going to learn and move with the opponent that they're going against. And I think that's probably maybe my biggest takeaway to circle back all the way to the Chargers of like, we need to do a lot better job of, and I'm saying I need to do a lot better job of these matchups that these teams are going against. And, I do the DFS show with Devin Knotts and Phil Alexander, and we're talking about matchups there week to week, but it's kind of, I do think we get a little bit locked into, play your studs, but we label too many player studs probably, and not looking
Mm-hmm.
at just some of these these defenses are horrible.
So let's talk. We've talked about a handful of different groups so
Yeah.
far, and you briefly mentioned the Panthers, and you talk about how like what, or you didn't mention the Panthers, but you talked about like now that Sean Tucker is out of the bottle, and Rashad White is looking really good in a lead role. What's it going to look like when Bucky Irving comes back? And that leads me to want to talk about the Panthers because we have seen like what Rico Dowdle is doing over these last few weeks is just absolutely unbelievable. Jeff, I know you love a good historical comp. Looking at what other guys have done. I pulled it up. 230 scrimmage yards over the last 2 years. Since 1970, the only running backs that have done that, Walter Payton, Marshall Faulk, Deuce McAllister, and Le'Veon Bell. Like he is in elite territory right now. I will say once you soften that threshold to 200, then you get some Jay Ajahis and some other guys in there that aren't quite as impressive. But to me, when I look at this Panthers backfield right now, it totally seems like the genie is out of the bottle here. And I don't know how you put it back in. Like we have talked so much about how they tried to rebuild this interior offensive line and that it's looked good, but Chuba Hubbard has been kind of underwhelming behind it. Now all of a sudden you've got two straight wins for just the second time in Bryce Young's career. Rico Dowdle is just establishing this physical brand of football that we know Dave Canales really wants from his team. So let's just hypothetically say Chuba Hubbard does return this week, which we're recording on Tuesday night. We have no idea if Chuba Hubbard's going to be there or not, but just for hypothetical purposes, how do you expect this backfield to be split now that we've seen Rico Dowdle do what he's doing?
Well, I have a list too. So players that over 2 game span with 380 rushing yards and 80 plus receiving yards: Doug Martin, Saquon Barkley, Walter Payton, and Rico Dowdle is
Wow.
so
I remember that Doug Martin rookie season. Those were good times. Yeah.
380 and 80. So it's getting to
Yep.
your list, but in different directions. But I think it's maybe looking at it less like how do you think the split's going to work out, and looking at it more as if I'm making a decision right now in my fantasy lineup, I feel like there is no way that I'm benching Rico Dowdle off of what he's done the
No.
last 2 weeks. And I would be very hesitant to put Chuba Hubbard into my lineup. It would have to be a little bit more of a I just need this start here. And I think like maybe less viewing it as how do I think it's going to work out and all of this, and more of like how am I managing it. And like I said, if I've got Dowdle, it's going to be really hard for me not to play Dowdle after what he's done these last 2 weeks, and I would be a lot more tentative with Hubbard.
So I remember talking last week when we were talking about my rest of season rankings article, and you were asking me like, why didn't you move Stephon Diggs up higher? And I was like, well, I feel like with rest of season rankings, you do kind of have to like incrementally move these guys up. You can't just swing every single week. That being said, when I was doing my running back rankings this week, I was just like, I am taking the cheese with Rico Dowdle. Like, I do not care. I'm not going to play the game like, all right, well, he was RB 52, now he's RB 48. I just swung him all the way up to RB 17 because this is a guy who it doesn't feel that fluky. Like, this isn't a guy who just completely came out of thin air and started producing. This was 1,000-yard rusher last year. This is a guy who's on a team with a very good offensive line. And this is a guy who right now has fresher legs than a lot of the league as well. So this is one where I didn't, tiptoe around it and say I'm going to take my time and slowly move him up the rankings. I moved Rico Dowdle up to RB 17, and I dropped Chuba Hubbard. I mean, I'm scrolling. I missed where he's at, but yeah, to like RB4 range. He's my RB 41 now. So I mean, I think what we're seeing from this backfield is just that Rico Dowdle is doing things that Chuba Hubbard just has not throughout his entire career.
Yeah, and I really wish that Pro Football Reference was giving me the. Sometimes you like highlight stuff and it doesn't exactly bring the table up right away that you want it to bring up, like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Great site. We're not going to
Great,
poo poo
amazing site,
on
amazing,
PFR,
absolutely
but
fantastic
every
site.
now and then I
We
know
are
exactly what
brand
you're talking about.
ambassadors.
Yes.
We love it, and we do everything that we can for Pro Football Reference. But the reason why I wanted to, they have an amazing table that what you can do is you can look at game logs and you can highlight games, and it will bring up just a great table that will tell you 17 game pace, all these different things that you could want to know. And you mentioned Dowdle being 1,000-yard rusher last year. It wasn't really even like
It all
before
came in
week
like the
10.
second half of the year.
Yes. So
It
he
all came
hit
in the second half. Like I
barely,
want to say he was averaging like 90 yards per game over the second half, something like that.
yeah, from week 12 through week 18, we have 7 games there where he was averaging 96.7 yards per game, a 1,643 yard pace over those stretch of those games. And it's really just the usage shifted because early in the season they were
Mhm.
involving Ezekiel Elliott. They just weren't giving Dowdle the full line share load. And so it took until about the halfway point. And the other thing to remember with that too, that wasn't a Dak Prescott offense that Dowdle was doing that in.
Right.
That was a Cooper Rush offense that Dowdle was doing that in. And Dowdle might have made Cooper Rush a whole lot of money this past offseason by making him a priority free agent quarterback that somebody could sign. And then, he lost his job after just 2 games because the play was so bad. I think there's a lot of interesting context on if you really start to dig into, because if you throw those 7 games on top of the last 2 games that we've seen from Dowdle, now all of a sudden in a
He
feature
looks like a
back
Hall of
role,
Famer.
it's like now we're up to like 9 straight games where he's like on like a 1,800 yard pace. Like, and that's like half a season. So this isn't just, I think the
1,800
context.
yard rushing and then, like,
Yeah.
another 800 receiving. Like, this
Yeah.
dude is, like what he's done over his last 8 games as a starter is better than basically what any other running back is doing in football right now.
Yeah, because I feel like the view on him is kind of like just a guy that got to 1,000 yards because, well, there wasn't anybody else on Dallas, and like just kind of because we do see those seasons sometimes where there's just
Right.
nobody, and a guy has 65 yards per game, and he gets to 1,000 yards, and he's technically 1,000 yard rusher. Dowdle is like an 1,800 yard rusher over the last 9 games.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, how did this guy go undrafted? How did he just, like, sit on a practice squad for a year? How could he not separate himself in a Dallas Cowboys running back room that was desperate for years? Like, he'd been with the Cowboys 2020, 21, 22, 23, like, just sitting there not getting any usage. And, like, this is another one, I go back and I watch the film, and this doesn't feel like a fluky thing. Like, this is a guy with amazing footwork. He's got speed. He's got burst. He's, one of those guys that accelerates through contact and punishes defenders. Like, he does everything that you want to see from a running back. And that's why I said, like, I don't, that I've only done this a handful of times this year where I've like aggressively moved guys way up the running back rankings. And it was Quinshon Judkins after his first game where I believe he had like 6 touches or something like that. But he had like a 36-yard run late in the game where he was breaking tackles. And I was just like, okay, that's something that I haven't seen from any other Browns running back. I'm moving him way up. Cam Scadaboo is another one. Like, once Cam Scadaboo had that big start 2 weeks ago, I was like, all right, I'm moving Cam Scadaboo way up. And now Rico Dowdle is another one where I'm just like, I've seen enough. Like, this guy is doing things right now. He is injecting a spark plug into this offense that they desperately need. I'm doing it. Like, I'm looking at Rico Dowdle as the real thing. So let's tie this into like dynasty conversations, because that's where I think things get really weird. Like, this guy has been in the league for a few years. He's 27 years old. You look at his profile, he's an undrafted guy. So what are you giving up here? Because like, nobody's trading Rico Dowdle away for a third round pick, but I don't think I want to give up a second round pick either for a 27-year-old undrafted running back who did nothing through the first 4 years of his career.
Well, and that is, there are just heaps of players that fall into the proverbial, I would want a second, but I'd give a third. Well, I'd want to, I'm not giving you a second, I'd give a third. Like, I think that there are so many players that just fall into that in between zone, and that's where you would have to get maybe a little bit creative on working a trade of, if you're not willing to just give up a second for Dowdle, then looking at some of these, like Jordan James is probably too far down the list, but like just kind of a, Devin Neal in a
Taj
third or
Brooks.
something like that, or like a Taj Brooks in a third or something like that, of like a younger running back that's occupying a spot on your roster that you're kind of willing to give up, that you can bridge that gap between just giving up a straight second. That being said, I am so tired of,
What about a Bayshal Tootin? Would you trade Bayshal Tootin for Rico Dowdle straight up?
it
The guy
depends
with,
probably where I'm at in competitively, because I think that there's a chance that they keep Travis Etienne around there in Jacksonville, and Tootin doesn't exactly get just, he takes over this backfield, and so if I'm a contender right now and I'm thinking that it's going to be, um, that's, I think that's an interesting, and I wonder if you couldn't put the pick on the other side on that one, where like give me a fourth.
yeah.
Like, here's Tootin
Mhm.
for Dowdle and a fourth, and like you get Tootin,
Right.
you're not contending, and that people are excited about that. Take that, and then you grab that later pick, and I really like with picks just the ability to have a pick because we see it so often. I see it all the time in rookie drafts, and there's a lot of talk about like NFL, NBA draft where it's a lot easier to move up than to move in. And so if you've got some of those later picks, then you can move up the board a lot easier than you can just trade in during rookie season when everybody wants to get all their rookies.
Let's stick with the Panthers, Jeff, because I do want to talk about the wide receivers here as well. Jalen Coker was able to log some limited practices last week, and it sounds like he's trending towards a return here in week 7. So, what do you expect this wide receiver room to look like once Jalen Coker is back in the fold?
I'm giving it up for Xavier Legette. I'm not there on. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's just Matt Waldman this week on the show with Bob Harris that says that's named something that we're not allowed to say on here. He was just saying how everything's too fast for Dottle. Or for not for Dottle, but for Legette.
Yeah,
Like Legette's just too slow when it comes to. He's not too slow moving with the ball, but like
in a straight line,
like
he's really fast, but
right.
it's the route running and the catching the ball and making a move after. I mean, like he does this thing every time he catches the ball. It's like his first instinct isn't to move downfield with it. It's to like jump backwards and then take a loss. And you see him do that all the time. And it is so frustrating. I still think like, he can be a guy that they can feed on some screens and slants and get the ball in his hand and let him create. But yeah, I think the hopes of him like establishing into that flanker or into that slot guy, I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, he just thinks too much, I think, is where a lot
Yeah.
of it comes down to. He's just thinking too much. And that's where I think Coker can step up here and be the second receiver behind Tedero and
Mhm.
McMillan. I think it's, to me, looking down the Panthers, Jimmy Horn Jr. I think is an interesting name where like we're seeing Bryson Tremaine, we're seeing Hunter Renfrow getting snaps and they're not getting a lot of targets, but every time I watch the Panthers, it's like you kind of have those guys out there. They're just kind of out there. And then Jimmy Horn Jr. will get the ball and it's like, oh, who is this guy? And it's like,
Fast.
yeah, fast. And so that's interesting. Plugging Jatavian Sanders back in there because we've seen Tommy Tremble and Mitchell Evans, the rookie
Mhm.
tight end, both make plays and points of the season. And so having a deep tight end room, maybe moving the direction that you play a little bit more 12 personnel. You have Coker as the other receiver outside of Ted McMillan on the other side, and then have them go that direction. That would be my expectation of what we're going to see. But I think that the my biggest concern on that would be, is the volume going to be there for a second receiver, because we haven't seen it yet. And I
Yeah,
know
we've seen like
Legette
one
has,
game, I think, that Bryce Young had like that one game with like 50 something attempts, and it's
yeah.
been pretty low volume in every other one.
Yeah, they were playing from way behind, and they did that. I mean, they were playing from way behind against Dallas, and we didn't see another receiver get going. We saw, or not way behind against Dallas, they way behind against Miami, and they just had Rico Dowdle just ran the ball down everybody's throats. And so, that's, if you're talking about these backs, it's, you're starting to talk about 8 or 9 different players where you're like, they're kind of interesting. Then like we really should probably just talk about Tedero McMillan.
So that being said, I do think Coker can just kind of be that guy that never really comes off the field because he does have some versatility as well. Like what we saw at Holy Cross is that he was very much so a flanker, and that was like his natural position. But what we've seen so far through his NFL career is that he can play out of the slot and be that power slot. That big bodied guy catching balls and making plays after the catch across the middle of the field. So I think that when you look at the other guys here, I think a lot of them are very siloed into what they can do. Like Hunter Renfrow isn't playing anything besides the slot. Jimmy Horn, he can kind of bounce back and forth between the slot and out wide. And then even Xavier Legette, it might not be pretty, but he can bounce back and forth as well. So I think what we'll see is kind of a rotation of Hunter Renfrow, Jimmy Horn, and Xavier Legette coming in and off the field. We're going to see Tedero McMillan just glued into that X role. And I think that Coker, his elasticity to move inside and outside, allows for them to rotate all three of these guys in. So I'm kind of buying in on Coker a little bit. Not like way, way, way in, but especially in a lot of redraft leagues out there, like he's on waivers. You can just pick him up for free right now, and that could potentially be free money. But I think the thing I'm most excited about is now finally having like some semblance of an actual wide receiver two should help Tedero McMillan, because we've seen right now he's 12th in the league in targets, he's 15th in the league in receiving yards. Like he's doing a lot of really good things, but it just hasn't really come together. I feel like he's on the precipice of breaking out and being like a bona fide wide receiver one. And I think having Coker there can help him get there.
Yeah, I think it was. I saw a lot of people declare this his breakout game this past week. He's scored 2 touchdowns, but he caught 3 balls.
He had 3 catches.
Right,
Lo
exactly.
Lowest targets, receptions, and yardage of a single game this season, but,
Yeah,
yeah, you got in the end zone twice, so nobody cares.
most points this breakout.
Alright, let's talk about we got the Chargers receivers on here, Jeff. Obviously, first game without Quentin Johnston, and just when I was almost out on Trey Harris, he pulls me back in. We see this guy tied with Lad McConkey for the most routes on the team. Not a lot of production to write home about, but I think that this kind of signals what their plans are for Trey Harris is that when he is up to speed and when they want to use him, he's going to be exactly what we expected him to be, just that X receiver that plays out wide, right?
Yeah, but I mean, is Quentin Johnston not going to be on the team? Because I don't
Right.
see
That's the
him
fear.
from what we've seen from Quentin Johnston overcoming. I just don't see Trey Harris overcoming Quentin Johnston. Like again, like the
No.
proverbial, you've pulled that genie out of the bottle. You're not benching Quentin Johnston to play Trey Harris. I think with the interesting thing, and we always said Chargers wide receivers converted wide receiver might be the interesting thing coming out of this Miami game because we saw Rondé Gadsden the
Anson.
second have a big game here where he really looked like the number 2 target in this offense behind Lad McConkey. And, it was I've started a new thing in my Friday article because I'm beating myself up still about the David Montgomery Cincinnati thing. So I called it Narrative Street, and just like forcing myself to really dig into these games and see like some of these things maybe a layer or two below. But Gadsden coming back to South Florida, where his dad is the 15th all time on the Dolphins receiving yardage and touchdown list, and then where he grew up and being able to play in that environment where it was really his hometown and having a career game. He didn't get into the end zone, but he saw 7 catches there. And the other part of it too, Lad McConkey dude's pretty good. So I think it's interesting when you dig into the numbers last year where Lad McConkey was through week 5. It was like wide receiver 51, and then he just kind of took off. But to me, it kind of
Uh,
said going into the game, we get a little bit more Lad McConkey, and we got a little bit more Lad McConkey.
I want to say I'm willing to excuse a slow start for a rookie a little bit more than I am for a year two guy. Like, it's easy. You can look at a lot of rookies and say they got off to slow starts and then finished hot. You don't typically always see that with year two guys. But let's go back to the Rondé Gadsden. I'm completely with you. Talk about him as a waiver wire pickup if he's available. Really excited about him. But going back to the Trey Harris thing, I think long term, can you see? I mean, Keenan Allen, we know he's on a 1 year deal there. We don't know if he's coming back next year or what his long term plans are. But let's say Keenan Allen is out of the picture, or you know what? Let's just even try to make it a little bit more topical. Let's just say Quentin Johnston's back this week, and Keenan Allen picks up some weird midweek injury. Could you see Trey Harris fitting in as the wide receiver 3 behind McConkey and Quentin Johnston? Or do you think that the deployment and the skill sets for Quentin Johnston and Trey Harris just overlap too much?
No, I think he would be the wide receiver 3, but I don't think it would be the wide receiver 3 in the same way that Keenan Allen is the wide receiver 3. Like
Right.
I think it would be, and even, he, like you said, most routes, but he wasn't really involved. It was a lot more
Like
like,
4 targets, I think.
yeah, and it wasn't even like kind of more like we're going to run the wide receiver screen. Trey Harris, you're going to be the guy that gets in the way so that we can have the wide receiver screen to Lad McConkey. So like that,
Which, hey, one of the best blockers in college football
yeah,
last year. So,
yeah.
he does that well.
It was more that type of thing. And so I think, yes, he would be the wide receiver 3. I think you'd see Keandre Lambert Smith playing more than you're probably seeing right now in terms of Trey Harris or Lambert Smith playing, because they do like him quite a bit as well. So should Keenan Allen get knocked out of the lineup, I think you would have Trey Harris going in there. But I don't think, and even then, I feel like the ranks are a little bit too aggressive on Keenan Allen, but that might be in the same conversation or a different conversation. But I think that I don't think you would see the similar type of role that you're getting out of Keenan Allen.
So let's talk about the Cardinals wide receivers, Jeff, because it looks like Marvin Harrison is probably going to miss week 7 with this concussion that he picked up. It was a pretty scary one, hit the back of his head hard on the turf, and you just like immediately saw him go down and knew what it was and didn't expect him to return in that game. And with him out, we saw Zay Jones, a guy that we have not really seen in quite a while, step into a pretty big role. And honestly, like, I don't know what to take away from this Cardinals game because we got no Kyler Murray, we've got no James Conner, we've got no Trey Benson, we've got no Marvin Harrison. I mean, like they're missing all of the premier pieces of this offense, but it didn't matter. Like Jacoby Brissett just goes out here and starts to throw the ball to Zay Jones, and we see the best game of the year for Trey McBride. And we saw what Jacoby Brissett did. I pulled this again. Love looking at these historical nuggets. The last time Kyler Murray had a 320-yard, 2-touchdown game was Week 8 of 2022. So Jacoby Brissett, like immediately, even without Marvin Harrison, just gets this passing attack back on track.
Yeah, probably because he's running the plays that are the way they're supposed to be run instead of.
You could see over the offensive line.
Well,
I'm sure that helps a little bit.
There's that, but I wonder if Kyler might be doing a little bit of improving when he's not supposed to be, or like some of holding the ball he's not supposed. I know that there was a lot of hand wringing and frustration about just not targeting the receivers. Basically, of like there was a stretch where it was basically everything was just a dump down, and so regardless of what might be available, he was just dumping it down, and so that might be it a little bit. I think when you look at these Cardinals, and this is one of those situations where a concussion is usually a game, and so we would think Harrison probably will be back the next week. So you don't really want to disrupt too much of like what Michael Wilson's doing, too much of what Greg Dortch is doing. So that's where you kind of get Zay Jones plugs in as like, it's like the Kendrick Bourne type thing where it's, you're not going to scheme Kendrick Bourne to be your primary receiver for the rest of the season for the 49ers. But when you're in a 1 or 2 game sample and you just need to get through this game, like, okay, well, like, let's see if we can plug Zay Jones into this role, leave everything else in our offense into the normal places where it should be. I don't know that it's backup narrative. I know our friend Corey Spalla does reporting on the Cardinals during training camp. And, Corey was saying that Zay Jones had won the wide receiver 3 job over Greg Dortch kind of comfortably. And then I think Zay Jones got a little bit banged up to start this year, and Dortch worked his way back in there. But Dortch is very limited in what you're able to do with him. And Michael Wilson, we've just seen him be more downfield threat that doesn't get heavily targeted in multiple areas of the field. And that's where Jones, we've seen in different stretches of his career. It wasn't that long ago. He had that major breakout year with Jacksonville, and we were kind of like, everybody's in on Zay Jones at that point of his career. And then he had some injuries the next year, wasn't able to follow it up.
I mean, I even remember before Jacksonville showing flashes with the Raiders.
Yes.
And I remember, you remembered like his second year in the league. Like this was an early round 2 pick that looked great in Buffalo as well. We won't get into all of it, but there were some mental health concerns, and he had some issues that he had to deal with, and he has had an arduous comeback, but he's back in the league now. And like we know this guy has a ton of talent, but it's been a mix of off the field stuff and then just consistent injuries throughout his career. But I feel like this happens like almost every single year. Like you could just count on it. Like there's going to be this game where it's like, oh yeah, Zay Jones, like we forgot that he is really, really good, and then just kind of fades away. So I mean, like, am I expected it to put it together for a whole year? No, because we just haven't really seen that at this point in his career. But if Marvin Harrison Jr. is out and you're in one of these deep dynasty leagues where you got a lot of guys on bye and you got a lot of guys that are injured, I think Zay Jones is a guy that you can pick up off of waivers. He's probably available in like 98% of dynasty leagues right now. And I think he makes for a viable flex play this week.
Was it Travis Fulgham? Was that the guy for the Eagles that had like 4 good games in a row?
2020, he was pacing for like 2,000 yards for like a 3-week stretch, and out of the league the next year, I believe.
Yeah. Well, and we just see it. We see these guys. I feel like there's been like 15 different guys with the Browns that in December they will be a wide receiver 1, and then like the next year they don't even hear from them again.
Travis Benjamin. Yep.
Yes,
I remember Travis Benjamin. He had his month where it was like, wow, the Browns got their guy.
Yeah, but I mean, and that's just kind of the being adaptable, and especially these deeper leagues that we do play in, that when you're starting 10 players a week, you've got multiple teams on buys, you've got major key pieces injured. Just some of these, like I feel like we struggle to, like, if you were to look at it heads up of like Torrey Horton or Zay Jones with Marvin Harrison out, like where do you feel like you would be leaning on that?
Zay Jones.
Yeah.
Pretty comfortably. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where I think there might be too much of a tendency sometimes to be like, well, I mean, Horton's flashy and I've seen him make plays, so like I'll play Horton. Like I don't know about Zay Jones, and some of these times you're just trying to win
Horton's
this
younger.
week of, Yeah, Horton's
Yeah.
younger. Mystery
No,
box could
you
be
just
anything.
automatically like if you start a 24-year-old over a 30-year-old, you're just starting with an
Yeah.
extra 6 points in the bank. That's how it works in Dynasty.
Yeah, but I think it's a good reminder as we get through, like I talked about Kendrick Bourne, just a good reminder of capitalizing on some of these windows of, and that's really kind of what we're talking about all day long here of some of these windows of Kendrick Bourne, of Rico Dowdle. Just capitalize on these windows, whether it's in Dynasty, if you could trade them off for a pick if you want to, whether they just give you a couple spot starts and, maybe it does fizzle out right away. Maybe you do play Kamani Vidal in all your leagues and it turns out to be Hassan Haskins. But given what you saw last week, you just have to go that direction.
Jeff, this has been a pretty level-headed and calm and non-emotional episode so far, but we're gonna take a turn here and talk about the Buffalo Bills. Floor's yours, man. Let's talk about the running backs here a little bit. I don't really know what to make of what's happening in Buffalo right now.
I, I just I don't understand. Like I don't know. I don't get it. What is happening in Buffalo right now is I think, in my opinion, the coaching staff is stale and the league has figured it out. Is what I think is going on, and that's what I think is happening. And I don't understand the James Cook usage at all. It makes no sense at all. It didn't make any sense last year against the Chiefs when they lost in the AFC Championship game. It makes no sense at all. James Cook is an excellent passing down back. Like that's why he got
Yeah,
drafted in day
yeah.
2 because he
It's
was
like all he did in
that's
college.
like all he did in college. He
Was it
played
Brian
Georgia.
Robinson? Is
No,
that
it
who he
was
split the
Zamir
backfield with?
White backfield. It
That's
was,
right. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
Kendall Milton was there. Like, but Georgia had these big bruising running backs, and they would have James White that would be like jitterbug, explosive passing game option. And then now it's the Bills have completely taken that out of the game. And I tweeted last night during the game of like, oh, Joe Brady's got to be so excited watching all the different things that Bijan Robinson is doing for the Falcons and thinking, I can't wait to try that with Ty Johnson because good Lord, like what is I mean, Joe Brady had Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase at LSU, and he made Clyde Edwards-Helaire a featured part of the passing offense. So that it's just the
He
same
had
thing.
DJ Moore and Christian McCaffrey, and he built an offense around Curtis Samuel, if I recall, right? I
Yeah,
mean, this is
and
always like he just gets so infatuated by these like tertiary
well,
pieces
it's like
rather than just looking at the superstars he has.
running these trick plays with Elijah Moore, and it's like Elijah Moore one caught it yesterday, but anyways, he's running these trick plays with Elijah Moore, and it's like, what are you doing? Like this is and very much like I'm thinking of I go to it a lot, but like the meme where you've got the guys on two ends and one guy's got the hood and the other guy's just a dumb guy. And then like the guy in the middle, that's like, like figuring like he's got all his things and it's just a bell curve. And it's on one end, you've got the guy in the cloak and the dumb guy's just saying, I'm just going to give the ball to my good players. And then in the middle, you've got these offensive coordinators that are just scheming all these different touches around for all these guys that just don't matter. And I think that's when it's was very evident last night of you look back against what the Falcons did against the Panthers when they got shut out. And it was just like, they were just doing too much and they were trying to involve different guys, Casey Washington, whatever else. And then like they fired Ike Hilliard. I think they brought Zach Robinson down to the sideline, probably so that Raheem Morris could yell at him in the middle of the game when he's not giving the ball to Bijan Robinson and
Get the
Drake
ball to
London.
Drake London and
Because
Bijan Robinson. Like your job is simple here. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And it's like the Arthur Smith thing of like, let's throw this pass to Casey Hayward for no real reason, or like instead of just throw the
Hey,
dang
we will
ball to
not
DK
accept
Metcalf.
Arthur
And
Smith. No Arthur Smith slander on the show. I love the game plan this week.
well, okay, but I'm just saying that I
Yes.
don't believe I see it all the time of like, well, I mean, these Bills receivers can't separate. It's because you're asking Keon Coleman to do the same thing every single play. And it's like, of course, he's not going to be able to. All he gets to do is run a 9 route where he's ignored or try a back shoulder throw. And that's it. And like, this is a guy that
You
returned
see,
punts
the
in
defenders
college.
are just pressing him to the boundary because
Yeah,
there's no threat of him breaking inside
no.
because he's like never done it once in his career. So they're just going to press him to the boundary and just take him out of every single play.
Yeah. And it's like you can tell me every single number about the separation that you want to, but it's if you're not allowing a guy the opportunity to do anything else. If we're in a boxing match and all I'm doing is swinging an overhand right over and over and over and over again, you're probably going to be able to know what's coming, and so like, you're probably going to block that overhand right over and over and over again. So the fact that that can't generate separation, of like, you have to be Randy Moss for that to generate separate, what are you talking about? And so that, like, that's where it's incredibly frustrating of like watching a Baker Mayfield go out there with, like, they're pulling dudes out of the parking lot to play for the Buccaneers wide receivers, and Baker Mayfield is just lighting defenses up. Or you look at Kendrick Bourne and you're plugging Kendrick Bourne in out of nowhere. You look at Zay Jones, you're plugging Zay Jones in. The idea that Keon Coleman can't be, I've seen Keon Coleman do some pretty fantastic things on a football field that very, very few players can do on a football field. You've seen it. And so if you see that, why aren't you trying to figure out different ways to unlock that and give him opportunities to do that? I've seen Khalil Shakir and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Do you think that those are wildly different players in terms of what they can do on the football field? Because I
I
don't
think
think
it's like
they
you
are.
turn it from 10 to 9, like, just turn that not just a little bit, and you've basically got Khalil Shakir.
Right. And so you see that I feel like you can utilize Khalil Shakir in the ways of a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown's being utilized and like that. And it's the way, and maybe it was just Dalton Kincaid missing last night. I don't know what it was, but that was awful. And I think the Patriots, maybe it was the Patriots showing the game plan of these receivers are just going to run the same thing. All you need to do is sit on these guys, and not having the extra element of Kincaid inside while everybody's just locking down on Khalil Shakir, so we can't go to him either. And so let's just run these BS things to Elijah Moore and Ty Johnson. You got the backbone of the 2022 New York Jets that is like the trying to win a Super Bowl with that.
Well, Jeff, I know that was a tough game for you to watch. The major takeaways here, though. I mean, what are we doing here for fantasy purposes? We saw Ray Davis heavily involved to the dismay of Jeff Bell, but he got a touchdown. And like, is there a life now in Ray Davis? Like, are we going to be looking at some sort of potential split now, where Ray Davis, like they said it a couple of weeks ago, they said we need to get more Ray Davis more involved, and we saw it. Is that going to continue now, or do you think they look at these back-to-back losses and just say, like, we can't keep doing this, like, we got to change something? As the resident Bills fan here at Football Guys, how do you expect to see them adapt coming out of these last two games?
I don't. I mean, I
uh,
I think that
that's the fear. Nobody's getting fired, you know that. Like, they're
well,
just going to ride this staff through to the end of the year.
current hope right now is that Terry McCullough is really, really connected to Penn State, and Penn State just fired James Franklin, and Joe Brady was at Penn
Yeah.
State when Joe Moorhead was the offensive coordinator there under Joe Franklin, or under James Franklin. So I think my current hope is that there during the bye week here, there's an interview in Happy Valley, and they give Joe Brady the opportunity to go be the head coach at Penn State and just get him out of my life here real quick. Because in terms of fantasy, if you put Keon Coleman or Khalil Shakir in your lineup, they're going to give you 7 points. And if you set them on the bench, they're going to score a touchdown. So you know that. And then James Cook, I mean, he has to get a touchdown, I guess, to be able to play him. You've got this dynamic piece that has one target and no catches over the last two games in trailing
That's
game scripts
crazy to
over the
me.
last two games. He didn't even
Like, he
play in
should
the
be
fourth
getting
quarter.
Jonathan Taylor treatment. He should be getting Taylor treatment, where, like, he just doesn't come off the field. They keep him in on running downs, passing downs, and, like, he should be the featured part of the offense. They paid him money to be the featured part of the offense, and then take him off the field on third down, where he's his most dynamic.
Well, and again, the juxtaposition of what the Falcons are doing the last couple of games, what the Falcons did last night. The Falcons are doing an amazing job of treating Bijan Robinson like a bell cow feature back, while also involving Tyler Algier, with, like, not to the detriment of either of them. They're keeping Robinson on the field. They're lining him up in the slot. And yes, I understand there are very few players that can do the things that Bijan Robinson can do. If you were to squint and think that there's a player that could get potentially into 70% of that or whatnot, or you could player that you could put in the slot, or what you would think would James Cook would be one of those players on that very short list of backs capable of doing those types of things. I mean, Ray Davis isn't really a Tyler Algier, but I'm just saying that it's just uncreative. It's been the same thing over and over again. And I think it was a needed change when Joe Brady became the offensive coordinator. But I think that we're quickly seeing why Joe Brady went from being the wonderkin at LSU to the hottest coordinator at Carolina to fired to headed out of the league to being in the right place, right time with Josh Allen, and it's you're not seeing a coaching staff capable of adapting. I mean, Sean McDermott has run the exact same defense for the last 6 years. He doesn't have the guys on the
Mhm.
back end to make for mistakes now. He doesn't have the pressure was hit or miss last night. So it's the league has just seen this team now.
Mhm. I think you're right, and I don't know if there's going to be a change this year. I think they're just going to run it back. The good news as a Bills fan is you've got Josh Allen, and he's still relatively young. Like that window isn't going to slam shut on you anytime soon. But I hope for your sake, Jeff, that we can see a change here
Yeah.
in
So
before the season ends.
you say what should they do? They should trade for a wide receiver, and they need to get a safety, but they should trade for a wide receiver. I would be calling the Saints about Chris Olave or Rashid Shaheed, or I would be calling about Jerry Judy.
Jawan
Or
Jennings is apparently on the block too.
John Jennings has
That's
every bone in his body is broken, so I don't know that he could play wide receiver. But like Jacoby Myers or like something like that
yeah,
of like get. And they tried last year with Mari Cooper. They
Mari
just were,
Cooper. Yep.
Cooper was damaged goods. They didn't realize it when they did that, but I saw could have had. I think the really frustrating thing is like if you look at being a Bills fan right now,
You're gonna
it's
say Pickens.
well, there historically, it's like you could have had Justin Jefferson, but instead you had Stephon Diggs. And I mean, that was
Right.
okay for a couple years, but also you could still have Justin Jefferson. Right now, you could have had easily for what you gave up for Amari Cooper and what you were seeing in the draft, you could have Xavier Worthy and George Pickens running around right now for Josh Allen. And instead you have Keon Coleman running the same route over and over again. And what? And so it's
I'm sorry, Jeff. I hope that was cathartic for you to get that off. I know you've been waiting to talk since last night's game, but before we wrap up the show, there's one more position that I want to talk about on a team, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals running backs. And we can keep this one pretty tight here, but Alfredo Brown and I talked about this earlier, and we got a YouTube comment saying like this is the worst thing about fantasy football is that you guys didn't give any sort of actionable advice. You just said I don't know what to do with this guy, but I don't know what to do with Chase Brown. You talk about the guys that like you're willing to buy for a third and trade away for a second, and they just kind of become these like stale dead assets. It kind of feels like that's where Chase Brown is right now because you've got some people that are like, "Ooh, I'll buy low," because the opportunity's there and this team could trend up. But then you've got these other people saying, "Well, I drafted him earlier. I just bought this guy in a trade this summer, and they aren't willing to sell low." So I feel like we're just kind of at this point with Chase Brown where you're like hoping things can get better for him, but we've seen this over the last 2 weeks now. Like he is slowly losing work to Samaje Perine. The workload that made him so valuable last year is now gone, and the efficiency is awful. So, what are you doing with Chase Brown at this point in time?
Chase Brown to me is a hold. In case you and that is not giving actual. It's just a hold. It is what
Right.
it is at
Yeah.
this point, and because you can make the argument or hope the case that Joe Burrow returns, and you're getting some semblance of what you thought you
League
drafted or
winner Chase Brown.
right. And I mean, if you
Yeah.
get into a 3-game playoffs, all I got to do right now is make the fantasy playoffs, and anything can happen there. And if the Bengals can maybe squeak out a couple games with Joe Flacco, or maybe the Steelers peel back a little bit, and that division is a couple games away, and they're able to get Joe Burrow active, then you're potentially having a different conversation or the fantasy playoffs. You can't unless it's like just a very, very, very shallow league, you can't really cut Chase Brown at this point. There's not a running back probably sitting on your waivers that's more valuable than Chase Brown, even if you can't put him into your lineup. You're just hoping that the situation changes, and that's actionable advice. That's a hold. That's sometimes you have a player that you've seen talent before, and sometimes it never changes. Sometimes you can
Right.
look back at players that like Jalen Waddle last year, where it's like,
Mhm.
I know Jalen Waddle's good, and like, but it's just not going to happen this year. And then now we turn around, and I mean, it took Tyreek Hill getting knocked out of the lineup, but Jalen Waddle looks pretty good, and you're pretty happy you have Jalen. And sometimes it's year to year. It can be like a Devonta Smith right now. So much talk about AJ Brown right now, which I understand he was the second round pick. To me, Devonta Smith feels like the more concerning piece of like AJ Brown's going to raise the ruckus until he either gets fed or maybe AJ Brown is the answer to the Bills' problem. Like
And
that,
even I just real quick, I want to chime in on AJ Brown. There's so much panic about AJ Brown, and we talk all the time about like the week one bias that like everybody anchors down to week one. How many targets per game do you think AJ Brown is averaging since week two?
Oh, it's like 8 or 9. Like, he's getting targeted.
Nine targets per game.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's pulled 9 targets per game since week 2. People are acting like this guy's getting like 2, 3 targets per game and it's just like dead in the water. Like it was that week 1 game that he was clearly, hampered by an injury and only pulled 1 target. People are still holding on to their panic from them, but the reality is like he's been AJ Brown. He's been a boomer bust guy who gets a lot of volume on a low volume offense.
Yeah, and some of these guys, it's you just got to look at him, and it hasn't got the touchdown yet, and it's like, yeah, he's not. It's not exactly what you drafted because he hasn't gotten touchdowns, but at the same time, a 19-point week, he had just 11 points this past week, and it looked like this week he was headed towards a bigger game, but then they kind of just stopped throwing him the ball. But I think it's more the point of like, what do you do with Devonta Smith? It's like that's not even the conversation right now. People aren't even realizing like it's so much AJ Brown attention. Like Devonta Smith just feels more stuck because
Mhm.
they're Dallas Goedert's a good player, and sometimes you see new coaches come in and they just change the scheme enough to say Dallas Goedert's a good player. He's going to be a featured piece of this offense. AJ Brown's going to be the squeaky wheel that he's going to have his games. And Devonta Smith, I know he had 100 yards a couple weeks ago, but that's the guy that I feel like is more trouble spot. And that's like
Right.
Chase Brown's kind of like that category of player. Just sometimes you see it year over year, a player that is very talented in what should be a good situation. You invested a top 5 draft pick on them, top 6 draft pick on them in your redraft league, and you can't drop them, you can't trade them, you can't do anything but hope that it breaks in their direction.
Jeff, you talk about a new coaching staff coming in and getting a fresh look at some players. It's a good segue for the show that we're going to do tomorrow, talking about some of the risers and fallers. I got a big time riser that I'm excited about because a new coach is now in there and hopefully sees the same thing that I do. But always a good time, Jeff, talking about some of these usage trends that we've seen, getting a little cathartic rant here and there, talking about, some things that we'd like to see change from the teams that we root for. But that's why we do this here. We're passionate. We love football and we love talking about football with you guys, taking the time to listen. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. So thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow talking about some of the biggest risers and fallers coming out of week 6. Thank you for tuning in.